Welcome to Midnight Murmurs, your one-stop shop for immersive storytelling and relaxation. In this sleep story, we invite you to join us on a journey through a world of magic and adventure. Follow our brave heroes, from a mysterious girl to a group of Bladesingers and mercenaries, as they uncover the secrets of the arcane and fight for survival. With a rich language, character development, and heavy dialogue, this tale is sure to capture your imagination and soothe your soul. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to Midnight Murmurs. With your support, we can continue bringing you the best in fantasy and sci-fi storytelling. Chapter 1: The Bladesinger and the Mercenary. The sun was just beginning to set over the dense forest as the young elf stepped out of the trees and onto the dusty road. He wore a long, flowing cloak and carried a gleaming sword at his side. His movements were fluid and graceful, like a dancer or a songbird in flight. As he walked, he passed a small caravan of merchants who were heading in the opposite direction. They eyed him warily, their eyes lingering on the sword at his side. The elf ignored them, lost in thought as he made his way towards the distant mountains. As he walked, he suddenly heard the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered man with a scarred face and piercing blue eyes. The man wore a suit of battered armor and carried a pair of wicked-looking daggers at his waist. "Hey there, elf," the man said with a smirk. "What's your name?" The elf regarded him coolly. "I am known as a Bladesinger," he replied. The man chuckled. "And I am known as a mercenary," he said. "My name is Kale." The Bladesinger inclined his head slightly. "A pleasure to meet you, Kale." They walked in silence for a few moments, the Bladesinger lost in thought and Kale eyeing him warily. Finally, Kale spoke up. "What brings a Bladesinger like you out here in the middle of nowhere?" he asked. The Bladesinger looked at him for a moment, considering his response. "I am on a quest," he said finally. "A quest?" Kale repeated, arching an eyebrow. "For what?" The Bladesinger hesitated. "I seek an ancient artifact," he said slowly. "A powerful relic that has been lost for centuries." Kale's eyes narrowed. "And what makes you think you can find it?" The Bladesinger gave him a small, enigmatic smile. "I have my ways," he said simply. They walked on in silence for a while longer, the Bladesinger lost in thought and Kale watching him with a mixture of suspicion and fascination. Finally, Kale spoke up again. "You know, elf, you might need some help on your quest," he said. "Someone to watch your back." The Bladesinger regarded him for a moment, considering. "And why would you offer to help me?" he asked. Kale shrugged. "I'm a mercenary." "It's what I do," he said. "Besides, I've been looking for a little adventure lately. And a Bladesinger on a quest for an ancient artifact sounds like just the kind of adventure I need." The Bladesinger regarded him for a moment longer, weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. "Very well," he said. "You may join me on my quest. But be warned, it will not be easy. And there will be danger at every turn. Kale grinned. I wouldn't have it any other way. As they walked on together, the Bladesinger and the Mercenary began to talk in earnest. They discussed their respective pasts, their skills and abilities, and their hopes and fears for the future. They talked about the world they lived in, a world of magic and monsters, where danger lurked around every corner. As they walked, they passed through small villages and towns, where they were greeted with wary looks and whispered rumors. The Bladesinger and the Mercenary ignored them, lost in their own world of conversation and contemplation. The Bladesinger spoke of his years of training in the art of swordplay and magic, of his travels to distant lands and his encounters with ancient beings. Kale, in turn, shared stories of his battles and skirmishes as a mercenary, of his scars and wounds, and of the friends he had lost along the way. As they talked, the sun sank lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the dusty road. Finally, as darkness began to settle over the land, the Bladesinger and the Mercenary came to a small inn on the edge of a village. Shall we rest here for the night? The Bladesinger asked, gesturing towards the inn. Kale nodded. Sounds good to me. I could use a drink. The inn was small and cozy, with a fire crackling in the hearth and a few locals huddled around tables, talking in low voices. The Bladesinger and the Mercenary found a table in the corner and ordered food and ale. As they ate and drank, they continued their conversation. The Bladesinger spoke of his home, a distant city of elves hidden in the heart of a great forest. He described the beauty of the city, the magic that infused every stone and tree, and the ancient lore that had been passed down from generation to generation. Kale listened with rapt attention, his eyes bright with fascination. It sounds incredible, he said. I've never been to a place like that. The Bladesinger smiled. Perhaps someday I will take you there, he said. If we survive this quest. Kale laughed. I like those odds. As the night wore on, the inn began to fill up with more travelers and locals. The Bladesinger and the Mercenary listened to the conversations around them, picking up snippets of gossip and news. They heard rumors of a dark force gathering in the north, of strange creatures stalking the forests, and of a powerful wizard who had gone rogue. The Bladesinger and the Mercenary exchanged a look. This was the kind of news that meant danger and adventure lay ahead. As the night wore on and the inn emptied out, the Bladesinger and the Mercenary retired to their room. They lay down on the creaky bed, staring up at the rafters as they talked late into the night. They spoke of their fears and hopes for the future, of the quest that lay ahead, and of the mysteries that awaited them. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the window, the Bladesinger and the Mercenary finally drifted off to sleep, their minds full of dreams and possibilities. The journey had only just begun, but they both knew that whatever lay ahead, they were in it together. And that was all that mattered. Chapter 2: The Bladesinger's Apprentice. Lyra stared at her mentor, Kale, as he moved gracefully through his sword forms. He was a mercenary, hired to protect caravans and hunt down bandits, but he was also a Bladesinger, a warrior who combined sword fighting with magic. Lyra had always admired Kale's skill, and she longed to become a Bladesinger like him. As Kale rested, Lyra approached him tentatively. "Do you think I could ever be as good as you?" Kale looked at her with a hint of amusement. Maybe, someday. But it takes years of practice to become a Bladesinger. Are you sure you're up for it? Lyra nodded eagerly. I'll do whatever it takes. Kale smiled. Good. I think I know just the person to help you. He beckoned to an elf who had been watching their training from a distance. Aravan, come meet my apprentice. Aravan approached them, his robes billowing in the wind. Greetings, Lyra. I am Aravan, a wizard of the Elven Court. Kale has told me of your interest in magic. Perhaps I can teach you a few things. Lyra was thrilled. She had always been fascinated by magic, and the idea of learning from a wizard was almost too good to be true. Aravan led her to a clearing and began to teach her some basic spells. Lyra soon discovered that she had a natural talent for magic, but her style of arcane was very different from Aravan's. He specialized in elemental magic, while Lyra was more drawn to the art of illusion. She spent hours practicing her skills, creating illusions of herself to distract imaginary enemies or making small objects appear and disappear. As she walked through the forest one day, lost in thought, she stumbled upon a hidden glade. In the center of the glade was a small pedestal on which rested a sword and a dagger. Lyra felt drawn to them, and as she picked them up, she felt a surge of power run through her. Excited, she ran back to Kale and Aravan to show them her discovery. Kale examined the weapons closely. These are no ordinary blades. They are ancient artifacts imbued with powerful magic. You must be careful with them. Aravan nodded in agreement. The sword is a weapon of light, blessed by the gods themselves. The dagger, however, is a weapon of darkness, and its powers are dangerous and unpredictable. Lyra was both thrilled and apprehensive. She knew she had to be careful with the weapons, but she couldn't wait to see what they were capable of. As Lyra continued her studies with Aravan, she faced a series of obstacles and challenges. She struggled to control her magic, which sometimes got out of hand, and she had to prove herself to the other members of Kale's mercenary band, who were skeptical of her abilities. She also discovered that the sword and dagger she found had a dark history. They had been wielded by a powerful Bladesinger centuries ago, who had used them to defeat an evil sorcerer. But after the battle, the blades disappeared, and their whereabouts had been unknown for centuries. Lyra found herself drawn to the weapons, despite the danger they posed. She began to incorporate them into her training, using them to enhance her spells and to practice her sword fighting. She felt a connection to the ancient blades, and she sensed that they were guiding her on her path to becoming a Bladesinger. Lyra also made new friends along the way. As Lyra continued to train and develop her skills, she grew closer to her fellow mercenaries. She had always been a bit of a loner, but she found that she enjoyed the camaraderie of the group. They had all seen and experienced things that most people could not imagine, and they shared a bond that was difficult to explain. One of the fighters in the group, a gruff dwarf named Torin, had initially been the most skeptical of Lyra's abilities. But as he watched her grow stronger and more confident, he began to warm up to her. One day, He approached her while she was practicing her sword forms. "You're getting better," he grunted. Lyra smiled. "Thanks. It's all thanks to Kale and Aravan and these blades." She held up the sword and dagger. Tauren eyed them warily. "Be careful with those. They're dangerous." "I know," Lyra said. "But I feel like I can control them. Like they're part of me." Tauren snorted. "Well, just don't get too cocky. There are plenty of things in this world that can kill you." Lyra knew that Tauren was right. She had seen enough danger and violence to know that anything could happen at any time. But she couldn't help feeling a sense of pride in her growing abilities. She was becoming a true Bladesinger, and she knew that with Kale and Aravan's guidance, she could become even stronger. As the group continued their travels, they encountered various challenges and obstacles. They battled a group of goblins who were raiding a nearby village, rescued a group of travelers from a pack of wolves, and navigated treacherous mountain passes. Through it all, Lyra grew more confident in her abilities and more sure of her place in the world. One night, as they settled down to make camp, Aravan approached Lyra. "I have a proposition for you," he said. Lyra looked at him curiously. "What is it?" "I would like you to become my apprentice," Aravan said. "I can see that you have a great talent for magic, and I believe that you could become a powerful wizard with the right training." Lyra was stunned. She had always admired Aravan's skills, but she had never thought of herself as a wizard. But the idea intrigued her, and she knew that she could learn a great deal from him. "I would be honored," she said. Aravan smiled. "Good. We will begin tomorrow." Lyra went to bed that night, her head buzzing with excitement and anticipation. She knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but she was ready for the challenge. She closed her eyes, clutching the sword and dagger close to her chest, and drifted off into a contented sleep. Chapter 3: The Bladesinger's Apprentice. Lyrian rode her horse through the dense forest, the sound of the animals' hooves echoing through the trees. She had been hired to assist the Bladesinger, Arin, in defending a remote fortress against an impending attack. It was a risky job, but Lyrian was used to taking risks. She was a mercenary, after all, and danger was part of the job description. As she approached the fortress, Lyrian took in her surroundings. The fortress was nestled deep in the forest, with thick stone walls and a towering gate. She could see the Bladesinger standing on the ramparts, watching her approach. Arin was an elf, tall and graceful, with long blonde hair and piercing blue eyes. Lyrian had heard stories about the Bladesinger's skill with a sword, and she knew that she would be wise to stay on her good side. Lyrian dismounted from her horse and made her way to the fortress gate. Arin met her there, a small smile on her lips. "Welcome, Lyrian," she said. "I'm glad to see you made it." Lyrian nodded. "It wasn't easy getting here, but I'm glad to be here now." Arin led Lyrian through the fortress, showing her where she would be sleeping and where the armory was located. Lyrian took in her surroundings with interest. The fortress was old, but well maintained, with tapestries and paintings lining the walls. As they walked, Arin spoke about the impending attack. "We've received word that a group of mercenaries is planning to attack us in the next few days. We need to be ready for them." Lyrian nodded. "I'll be ready. What can I do to help?" Arin hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "There is one thing. My apprentice, Althea, is struggling with her training. She has a talent for sword fighting, but she's having trouble mastering a particular style of arcane magic. I was hoping you might be able to help her." Lyrian raised an eyebrow. "Me? I'm a fighter, not a wizard." Arin smiled. "I know, but you're also skilled in magic. You might be able to help her where I cannot." Lyrian hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I'll do my best." Arin led Lyrian to the training yard, where Althea was practicing with a sword and dagger. The girl was small and wiry, with short brown hair and bright green eyes. She looked up as Lyrian approached, her expression guarded. "This is Lyrian," Arin said. "She's going to help you with your training." Althea nodded, but said nothing. Lyrian watched as Althea went through her routine, her movements precise but lacking in finesse. It was clear that she was struggling with the arcane magic that Arin had mentioned. Lyrian approached her. "May I join you?" Althea hesitated, then nodded. They began to practice together, Lyrian watching closely as Althea worked through the motions of the arcane style. It was a difficult style, one that required precise movements and a deep understanding of magic. "You're close," Lyrian said after a few minutes. "But you're not quite there yet." Althea scowled. "I know that. I just can't seem to get it right." Lyrian nodded. "It's a difficult style. But I think I know what you're doing wrong. Let me show you." Lyrian took the sword and dagger from Althea's hands and began to demonstrate the style. Her movements were fluid and graceful, and she wove magic into the blade with ease. Althea watched with interest, then tried again herself. This time, there was a marked improvement. Her movements were smoother, and the magic flowed more easily. "You're doing it," Lyrian said, a note of pride in her voice. "You're really getting it." Althea grinned. "Thanks to you. You're a great teacher." Lyrian smiled back. "I'm just glad I could help." As the days passed, Lyrian continued to work with Althea, helping her master the arcane style. They talked as they practiced, and Lyrian began to learn more about the girl. Althea was young, only 18, and had grown up in the fortress. Her parents had both died when she was young, and Arin had taken her in as her apprentice. Lyrian found herself drawn to the girl's spirit and determination, and began to see her as more than just a student. But she knew better than to act on her feelings. She was a mercenary, after all, and getting involved with someone in the fortress could be dangerous. As the day of the attack drew closer, Lyrian and Althea continued to practice together, honing their skills. Lyrian began to notice that Althea was growing stronger, more confident. She was no longer the timid girl she had been when Lyrian first met her. On the day of the attack, Lyrian was ready. She stood on the ramparts with Arin and Althea, watching as the mercenaries approached. They were a ragtag group, but they were armed and dangerous. The battle was fierce, with swords clanging and magic crackling through the air. Lyrian fought with all her might, her muscles aching with the effort. Althea was by her side, her sword flashing in the sunlight. Lyrian was proud of her, proud of how far she had come. In the end, the fortress was saved. The mercenaries were defeated, and Lyrian and Althea stood victorious. As they walked through the fortress in the aftermath of the battle, Lyrian couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness. She knew that she would be leaving soon, moving on to her next job. But as she looked at Althea, she knew that she would never forget her. The girl had become more than just a student, more than just a companion in battle. She had become a friend, and a reminder of what Lyrian had lost. As they walked, Althea spoke up. "Thank you for everything, Lyrian. I couldn't have done it without you." Lyrian smiled. "You did it all on your own. I just helped a little." Althea shook her head. "No, you did more than that. You taught me to believe in myself." Lyrian's heart swelled with pride. "I'm glad I could help." As they walked on, Lyrian knew that she would never forget her time in the fortress, or the girl who had become her apprentice and her friend. Chapter 4: The Bladesinger's Secret. Althea stared into the fire, lost in thought as the rest of the mercenaries settled into their bedrolls. The journey had been long and arduous, and they had faced many challenges along the way. But now, as they neared the entrance to the dungeon that held the artifact they sought, Althea's thoughts were consumed by a different kind of challenge. She had been hiding her secret for weeks, ever since they had set out on this quest. Althea was a Bladesinger, one of the elite elven warriors who had trained for years in the art of sword fighting. But she had a secret: she fought without the use of her beloved swords. Instead, she relied on a style of arcane magic that allowed her to summon blades of pure energy. It was a risky and frowned upon practice, but it was the only way Althea knew how to fight. As she watched the flames dance, Althea couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She stood up and walked a short distance from the camp, scanning the darkness for any signs of danger. That's when she saw them, a group of bandits, armed and ready for a surprise attack. Althea quickly raised the alarm, and the mercenaries sprang into action. The bandits were no match for the skilled fighters, and soon they lay defeated at their feet. But Althea had been caught off guard, and in the chaos of the battle, her secret had been revealed. The wizard in the group, a tall and lanky man named Erasmus, had been watching Althea fight with interest. When he saw her summon the energy blades, he gasped in surprise. "Althea, you're using arcane magic." "That's amazing," he exclaimed. Althea froze, unsure of how to respond. She had expected to be met with disapproval or even hostility from her fellow Bladesingers, but Erasmus seemed genuinely impressed. "I didn't know Bladesingers could use magic," he said, his eyes wide with wonder. Althea hesitated for a moment, then decided to come clean. "It's not something we talk about," she admitted. "The use of arcane magic is heavily frowned upon among Bladesingers. We are supposed to rely only on our swords and our physical abilities." Erasmus nodded, his curiosity piqued. "But you're different. You have a unique style, a mix of physical and magical abilities. It's amazing, Althea." As they talked, Althea felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time in weeks, she felt truly seen and appreciated for who she was, rather than hiding behind a facade. Over the next few days, Althea and Erasmus spent hours discussing the finer points of arcane magic and how it could be used to enhance her fighting skills. They experimented with different techniques and strategies, and Althea found herself growing more confident in her abilities. But not everyone was thrilled with Althea's new ally. The fighter in the group, a rugged and imposing man named Kale, had always been wary of magic users. "They're unpredictable," he grumbled one day as they set up camp. "You never know what they might do." Althea tried to reassure him, explaining that her style of magic was not meant to harm anyone. But Kale remained skeptical, and tensions began to simmer between the two of them. As they neared the entrance to the dungeon, the group grew more and more tense. The artifact they sought was said to have incredible power, and they knew that they would face many dangers along the way. At last, they arrived at the entrance to the dungeon. The door was massive, made of solid stone and covered in ancient runes. Althea stepped forward, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. "I'll go first," she said. "If there are any traps or hidden dangers, I should be able to spot them." The rest of the group nodded in agreement, and Althea pushed open the door. A rush of stale air greeted them, and they stepped cautiously into the dimly lit corridor. As they walked, Althea could sense Kale's eyes on her. She knew that he still didn't trust her, and it made her uneasy. But she refused to let him get to her. She had a job to do, and nothing would stop her. Suddenly, they heard a loud noise up ahead. Althea motioned for the group to stop, and she crept forward, her hand gripping the hilt of her sword. As she rounded the corner, she saw a group of goblins, armed and ready to attack. Althea charged forward, her energy blades flashing as she cut through the goblins with ease. Kale and the others followed close behind, their weapons clashing against the goblins' crude weapons. As the last of the goblins fell, Althea turned to face Kale. "I hope you're satisfied now," she said, her voice laced with anger. "I can handle myself just fine." Kale didn't respond, but Althea could see the respect in his eyes. She knew that she had proven herself in battle, and that was all that mattered. The rest of the journey through the dungeon was perilous, but they faced each challenge with courage and determination. Althea's energy blades proved to be invaluable, and Erasmus's knowledge of arcane magic helped them navigate through the trickiest of traps. At last, they reached the inner chamber, where the artifact was said to be hidden. It was a small, ornate box, covered in intricate designs and glowing with an otherworldly light. Althea reached out to grab the box, but suddenly she felt a surge of power coursing through her. The box was cursed, she realized, and it was draining her of her energy. She gritted her teeth and tried to fight through the pain, but it was too much. She collapsed to the ground, her energy blades flickering out of existence. Kale and the others rushed to her side, but there was nothing they could do. Althea was weak and defenseless, and the artifact was still out of reach. Just when all seemed lost, Erasmus stepped forward. "I have an idea," he said, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "Althea, you said that your energy blades are a mix of physical and magical abilities, right?" Althea nodded weakly, unsure of where Erasmus was going with this. "What if we combined our powers?" Erasmus continued. "I can channel my magic through your blades, giving them an extra boost of power. Together, we might be able to break the curse on the artifact." Althea looked at Erasmus in surprise, then nodded. It was a risky plan, but it was their only chance. Erasmus began to chant, his words infused with ancient magic. Althea summoned her energy blades once more, and together they surged forward, striking the cursed box with all their might. There was a blinding flash of light, and then all was still. Althea collapsed to the ground. Chapter 5: The Style of Arcane. The group arrived at the temple, exhausted but determined. They had traveled for weeks, crossing treacherous mountains, braving harsh deserts, and navigating dense jungles to reach this ancient site. The temple loomed before them, its walls adorned with intricate carvings and its entrance guarded by stone statues. As they entered the temple, the group was immediately struck by the grandeur of the structure. The walls were lined with torches that cast flickering shadows on the carved reliefs depicting battles and victories. The air was filled with a musty scent of age and dust, and the sound of their footsteps echoed through the empty halls. The group soon realized that they were not alone in the temple. They heard whispers and shuffling noises from the shadows, and saw figures darting between the pillars. The mercenary drew her sword, and the Bladesinger readied his bow. The elf whispered a spell under her breath, and the wizard summoned a ball of fire in his palm. The enemies appeared from the shadows, and the group fought them off with a flurry of blades and spells. The mercenary moved with agility, striking swift and deadly blows with her sword. The Bladesinger sang a haunting melody that seemed to imbue his arrows with a magical power. The elf weaved intricate patterns with her hands, conjuring illusions and blasts of arcane energy. The wizard chanted incantations that made the very air vibrate with power. As they fought their way deeper into the temple, the group encountered a series of obstacles and challenges. They solved puzzles that required logic and intuition, navigated traps that demanded quick reflexes and careful timing, and traversed terrain that tested their endurance and agility. The group also encountered allies and enemies within the temple. They met a mysterious girl who seemed to have knowledge of the temple's secrets. She revealed that the magical artifact they sought was hidden deep in the temple, guarded by powerful wards and spells. She offered to help them, but warned them that they would have to face a formidable sorcerer who was determined to stop them at all costs. The group thanked the girl and continued their journey. They reached the inner sanctum of the temple, where they faced their greatest challenge yet. The sorcerer was a towering figure, his face obscured by a hood and his hands wreathed in crackling energy. He unleashed a barrage of spells that tested the group's skills and endurance. The Bladesinger and the elf engaged the sorcerer in a fierce battle, their weapons and spells clashing with his own. The mercenary and fighter defended their companions, their swords and daggers slicing through the sorcerer's minions. The wizard summoned all of his powers, creating shields and barriers that protected the group and weakened the sorcerer's defenses. As the battle raged on, the group began to notice something strange. The sorcerer's style of arcane was unlike anything they had seen before. It was wild and unpredictable, shifting and changing like a living thing. The sorcerer seemed to be drawing power from some unknown source, his eyes blazing with a strange light. The Bladesinger and the elf exchanged a look, and they began to adapt their own style of fighting. They moved with a grace and fluidity that matched the sorcerer's own, weaving intricate patterns with their weapons and spells. The mercenary and fighter followed their lead, moving with a precision and speed that left their enemies reeling. The wizard used his powers to manipulate the very fabric of reality, creating illusions and distortions that confused the sorcerer and his minions. The group fought on, their movements becoming more and more synchronized. They seemed to be moving as one, anticipating each other's moves and covering each other's weaknesses. The sorcerer, for all his power, seemed to be losing ground. His spells grew weaker, his minions faltered, and his defenses crumbled. Finally, with a mighty roar, the group launched a final assault. The Bladesinger and the elf shot arrows and spells that pierced the sorcerer's wards and protections. The mercenary and fighter charged forward, their blades slashing and hacking at the sorcerer's minions. The wizard chanted a spell that summoned a massive burst of arcane energy, engulfing the sorcerer in a blinding light. When the light faded, the sorcerer lay motionless on the ground. The group approached him cautiously, their weapons and spells at the ready. But as they drew closer, they saw that the sorcerer was not dead. He lay there, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow. The girl appeared from the shadows, her eyes wide with wonder. "You did it," she said. "You defeated him." The group looked at each other, still panting from the battle. They had succeeded, but at a great cost. They had lost friends and allies along the way, and they had faced challenges that had tested their limits. But they had also gained knowledge and experience that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. The group left the temple, the artifact in their possession. They journeyed back to their homeland, each lost in their own thoughts. The Bladesinger and the elf exchanged a look, a silent acknowledgement of their newfound understanding of the style of arcane. The mercenary and fighter walked side by side, their swords and daggers now sheathed, but ready for any danger that might come their way. The wizard gazed up at the stars, his mind filled with visions of the arcane secrets that he had uncovered. As they approached their homeland, the group saw that it had changed. There were new threats and challenges, new battles to be fought. But they were ready. They had learned the lessons of the temple, and they knew that they could face anything that came their way. They had become more than just a group of adventurers. They had become a team, bound by shared experience and a common purpose. The group parted ways, each going their separate paths. But they knew that they would always be connected by the memories of their journey and the lessons that they had learned. They had found their own style of arcane, and it had changed them forever. Thanks for joining us on Midnight Murmurs for this enchanting sleep story. We hope it took you on a magical journey and left you feeling relaxed and inspired. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to check out our other immersive tales of adventure and fantasy. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel to stay up to date with the latest uploads and help support us in bringing you more spellbinding content. Until next time, happy dreaming.